Hi, I'm Helen Harrison, the director of the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center in East Hampton, Long Island, and an advisor to the Techspressionism exhibition at the Southampton Art Center. I'm here with Frank Gillette, who is a pioneer of digital art and who is one of the participants in the show. Frank, it's great to see you again. And I'd like to talk a little bit with you about the work that's going to be exhibited and the concepts behind it.
The work that is being exhibited is from two series. One is entitled Prelude, and the other one is entitled, cut it out, damn it.
That's an interesting title.
It's called a Post-Apocalypse, which I think is quite apt at the moment, since I believe we're entering and this is an interesting point for me, we're entering a phase. Go work on your tan. We're reaching what physicists call a exclamation point, in effect, which is ecological collapse, war, cultural revolutions of all sorts, and the rise of authoritarianism in the West. So what is the role, for me, what is the role of the Künstler, the artist, with this condition, with this set of conditions? And in my opinion, it's essentially to what I've always argued back before digital, analog video in the late 60s. My first show was in 1968, or not, yeah, 8. So I've been at this a long time. The idea is relatively simple, and I'll make it as simple as possible, and then we can make it complicated. That one of the functions of the artist in this condition, this set of conditions, is to intercept media technologies and deflect them from their commercial intent, which is the largest portion of digital activity, is commercial. It's not aesthetic, and attempt to bring out an aesthetic statement or an aesthetic procedure that follows the rules of the game in terms of the technologies, but turns it into an aesthetic aim, rather. And that's the simplest way as I can put it.
Well, I understand that, it's not the medium, it's the message, as I said to Suzanne. But I remember David Sarnoff back in the 1930s at the dawn of television. He thought of it as an art form. And of course, it was immediately co-opted for commercial purposes. But in the initial concept was artistic or creative, rather than simply to get people to buy things through advertising and manipulate their minds through propaganda.
Advertising is propaganda.
Yeah, good point.
In any case, so there are two bodies of work that are pretty much relevant, and that, well, yeah, three actually. There's the very first one under Prelude. If you can bring it up on my screen, I can't. I can turn to my own website, but that would mean I have 3 computers. Is this the only one I can get up a website on? The other 2 are working on other things. In any case, we should have planned this better, I suspect, or I should have planned this better. I thought spontaneity would be the rule of the game, but
no, I think that's
it turned
fine.
out to be a set of formal statements. What was that?
I say I think that's fine. I think you're talking about 3 different bodies of work.
Yes, the first is entitled Prelude, and it has approximately 30 images. The second is Post-Apocalypse, and that has an additional 30. And the third one is Aqua's Fate, which is about, I would say 20 images. Each of them, my main concern, with a war even going on in Ukraine, is that is moving off the page, which is the most important of the crises, which is ecological collapse. So you can achieve peace, perhaps, maybe, and still you'll be encountering a greater onslaught of, unexcusable and indisputable collapse, social and ecological collapse. Social collapse leading out of ecological collapse, basically through chaotic migrations in the beginning, through the contamination of water supplies, the failure of crop yields, and so on. Also the collapse of acidification. And it strikes me that the issue again is, how does the artist interpret that and address it, and what he comes up with. In my case, I just named 3 website portals that make my statement, which is essentially that we are confronted with what I just said above. I don't want to be a prankster. I don't want anyone panicking on what I'm saying. I mean, one should be alert. And if you can provide aesthetic judgment for evaluating all of these points, that would be the function of the artist, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about presenting this information in a different way from, let's say, a journalist or a novelist or a poet. This is visual information. Right. And I'm wondering what it was that drew you to the animated image, to video and digital technology to make that statement.
What drew me to it was Marshall McLuhan in the late 60s. I met McLuhan I won't go through all the details. I met McLuhan, and he had 4 of the original Sony Portapak portable television systems, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I could begin thinking about TV, so to speak, in ways which weren't monological. That is to say, you didn't look at a single screen anymore. Now you looked at a group of screens interacting in various ways. The first result of that was a piece called Keep for 4 Screens, naturally in my studio. It was never shown publicly, but a lot of artists came over to the studio and witnessed it. The first public expression of this idea, that you can no longer settle for television as a single porthole, was Wipe Cycle at the Howard Wise Gallery in the spring of 69. And that was 9 screens on tape delays, and it was all analog. We had no, I'll give you an anecdote that might amuse. When I presented the proposal to Howard Wise, and he said to me, "Can you really do this?" And I said, "Yes." I had no idea whether I could do it or not. And then the second line was, "Can you do this for $10,000? Now this is $10,000 in 69 money, a good chunk of money. And I said, yes, of course, no problem. Non c'è problema, as we say in Rome. And so I went out and I got all the technical information I could get. And I went to this processing place for TV. In those days, it was mostly broadcast TV. And I said, this is the idea. Can you build this system that I've designed for $10,000? And they said, we'll get back to you tomorrow. And they came back to me tomorrow and they said, yes, we can do it. I said, how long will it take? They said, well, give us a month. But it only took 3 weeks, by the way. They under-promised and they over-delivered. And that was the beginning for me. And the Howard Wise show, of course, was of high significance. It was the first show where the title of the show is a giveaway. TV as a creative medium was the title of the show. Spring of 69, had a small pamphlet instead of a catalog. And so that kicked off the video movement. And then I formed a group called Rain Dance Corporation. Rain Dance was a mocking reference to R&D, the Rand Corporation. It was a play on words, plus it also the significance of Native Americans. I mean, Toynbee, the great English historian of the 19th and 20th centuries, once said, civilizations begin in the dance, and end in rhetoric. And we're suffering from that at the moment.
Yeah, right. We have an overabundance of rhetoric, that's for sure.
And it's
not enough dance.
It's not the elegant rhetoric of Aristotle, or the philosopher K.B. Burke, who was the master of this theories of rhetoric. It's the rhetoric of the advertising system, the marketing system. Things are no longer, the rhetoric is no longer devised to express serious ideas. It's to figure out other ways, and other than the ones that have already failed, of commercializing even language. I mean, branding, they call it. The whole branding issue, I think, is a form of corruption. It's about my brand will beat out your brand and succeed commercially, where you'll go down in flames. And I think the role of the artist, again, is to somehow figure out how to use aesthetic judgment to preclude all other forces, including the ones that are patently political, and turn them towards aesthetic judgment.
Well, in order to do that, you have to devise a means of visual communication that will express those ideas without them being dependent on the explanation, on the verbal or textual references. How do you do that?
I can only describe pieces. I described Life Cycle, which had 2 delay systems. He was confronting, as you get out of the elevator at the gallery on 57th Street, as soon as the elevator door is open, you show on a TV screen, a monitor. And then 4 seconds later, you show up again, only in 4 seconds later time. So you see yourself walking out of the elevator again. And then as the first two, in real time, and in 4-second time, suddenly it's 8-second time. So you're being thrown around in 3 different levels of time, and plus, therefore 5 levels, because you also have real time. In a grid of 9 screens. So that was one way, without mentioning a word of how it was done or why it was done. It was self-evident. It was using television in a non-commercial way, a way that has nothing to do with marketing or branding or whatever. And then the second show that I did was in later, let's see, when was the second one? The second one was at the Walker Arts Center, later in 69 or early 70. Yeah, it was late in 70, because it was the winter in Minneapolis with the Walker, of course.
There's a challenge.
When I got off the plane, in those days, it was before you went through all of these checkpoints. You walk right out into the tarmac, and it's like a 5-minute walk to the terminal. And they said, watch out, your eyes might freeze over. I said, great. What an introduction. So that was the second piece. It was called Track Trace. And that piece was 15 monitors on 8 delay systems presented to the audience. So they saw themselves in real time, 8 seconds ago, 12 seconds ago, 18 seconds ago, 20 seconds ago. And they're completely confined to the gallery space. So all they saw was the gallery space and the monitors. There was nothing else competing with on the walls or whatever. So it consumed one of the whole galleries at the Walker. So that was the second piece that I'm referring to that started things up. The third piece was at the Brandeis Museum. It's the Rose.
The Rose Art Gallery.
And that one was with 10 monitors on delay. And it was very curious because Buckminster Fuller, who was one of my heroes, was preaching or more soliciting attention at the museum, not the museum, at the university. And he came in to watch it. And I said to him, I said, part of the sources of this was your thinking, which affected me. The idea that you can turn technology around, you're not locked into the way it is at the moment. And he was utterly fascinated watching the 10 screens were like this: 5 screens on the bottom looking up and 5 screens on the top looking down. So your image went this way up and held the image and went this way down. So you're going like this in time. So, and you're held for 6 seconds each. So all of my early work, we're talking about 1970, 71 now, was calculated to multiply the aesthetic value of TV as not as a single screen. That's phase 1. Then Rain Dance came along. And through luck and pluck, I raised $70,000 in late 1969 money from a private backer who had backed my work prior to that. And that was a social force, as I said earlier, that we try to work up theories of recognition of the media. That's basically through McLuhan and an anthropologist philosopher by the name of Gregory Bateson. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but artists should be familiar with him. He once said to me, I was very good friends with him. For the last 5 years of his life, 7 years of his life, I was very good friends. And he said to me, I said, why do you want someone like me coming to your conferences? He was inviting all of these heavyweight social thinkers into his conferences. And he invited me. And he said, I wanted to know how an artist would respect and regard what we're doing and what can we do with you. In other words, we want to take our ideas and force them into the art world's thinking and theorization. So that was the next stage, which was Rain Dance. And we produced seminars, videotapes. We produced, anybody was invited in with a good idea, make your pitch, and we gave you all of the studio equipment, which we had a garner's worth. And you can make your own. So we were inviting outsiders, not only making tapes ourselves, but inviting outsiders to make proposals. So that was the next stage, going social, so to speak. And I was the founder, the founding president of it with 3 other people, Marco Vassi, let's see, Louis Jaffe and Michael Schamberg. They should all get credit. Well, after 1 year of me being the so-called managerial force, the backers' lawyers came to me and they said, we will give you more money. You just burned through $70,000. This is just 1 year. We'll give Rain Dance more money under one condition: you resign. You're an incompetent, you're a great idea man, but you're an incompetent manager. And you burned through all this money, and where's the result? Well, you got a lot of tape and so on, but it didn't sustain itself. It didn't pay for itself. So I gradually, I said, thank you very much.
Well, at least you were grateful.
Said, no, we'll consult with you. We want your ideas, but you're no longer the man. No, you're not president anymore.
Well, then the idea is actually, if you're going to give people an outlet for their creative ideas and using the technology that you provide, then obviously you have to be able to sustain it in one way or another. The way a sculpture studio casts the bronzes for people, then they have to be able to sell them in order for you to go back and do more. But was it easier to do that with digital technology where, it's, you don't have to have all that heavy
Well,
equipment?
there are two phases in digital technology. One began in, let's see, let me get the dates right. So this is a classical position here. Began in 81 when I was a artist in residence at the Art Institute in San Francisco. And I convinced the director of the Art Institute and the president, Stephen Goldstein. I don't know if you know him or not.
Mhm.
Well, he's retired since. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to start, at that time, video, digital technology was very primitive. And so you work with what you got, and an institute, or was an institute as an extension of a corporation. It's called Safari. Are you familiar with what Safari was?
Mhm.
Well, Safari got wind of it through Stephen, I propose, and they sent us to the institute 6 of their systems.
Wow.
They were relative, but I could think in terms of multiples again.
Mm-hmm.
And Stephen gave me a class, a seminar class, where I had a whole bunch of students. This is now 81. And again, compared to now, what you can do, it was a pebble compared to Mount Everest. That's a lousy, lousy example, not quite. That was the next phase, going academic.
Mm-hmm.
And that was initially still on the edges of, it was the transfer from dialogical to cryptological, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And
So the imagery that you're trying to create, you feel that you really couldn't create it any other way, that this
correct.
technology is what enables you to realize your vision?
Yes, absolutely correct. By training and temperament rather, I'm a painter.
Mm.
And I was a product of Columbia University and Pratt Institute. I quit both of them after the second year, so I'm a classic dropout from the 60s. So a lot of my Tanny Hanninger wrote a great article on it in which he called me all those things, referring to the implications in my digital work that remind her of my painterly past.
Mm.
So I would say some of my influences are my own education in the early 60s.
Mm-hmm.
I'm involved in classical motions. I consider myself not as much an avant-gardist. I hate those terms, by the way. Number one, they're not the avant-garde. The avant-garde is too spread out. I mean, the mission might have been okay with Artaud, but I don't think in the present tense it applies. And if you look at the images I pointed out, and those 3 sites on my website, you'll see, I suspect, some painterly ideas of value of composition, turning this around and that around. And instead of being an avant-gardist, I would claim I'm a radical traditionalist. It's a far more effective description in my own work than, I'm too much I wind up in books about the avant-garde, and I should write to the publishers to have me exercised. But anyway, that's that measure.
Well, you called, I think, on your website, you discussed a kind of radical naturalism.
Yes.
And that they're metaphors in a sense, but they also have to function as perceptual, visual information. They can't just be rhetorical.
I concur. Well, you can say that about Rubens, or you can say that about Giotto. Mm-hmm. Or for Giotto, he was working for Christ. For Rubens, he was working for buttocks.
Or for the patron, of course. Now that's another question. When you have, let's say a corporation comes to you and said, we have all this equipment that you can use, but it's coming from us and we have to control how you use it. You can't, the artist can't fall into that trap.
I would show them the door.
Mm.
For commercialized, no, it's not in my blood, i.e. my being fired from my own corporation.
Right.
A corporation, by the way. There was a lick on there. Anyway, yeah, so that's the issue of the force of painting in my work.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and
that's also...
I do make direct references to, they have to be picked out, because I work with a lot of layers. I don't work with just one layer. On average, I would guess, this is on average, some of them are less, some of them are much more. On average of 20 layers in each image.
Mm-hmm. And you use Photoshop for that?
I use
Photoshop?
Final Cut Pro and Photoshop. Photoshop for the blunt work, and Final Cut Pro for the refinements and yeah, refinements would be the best way to put it.
Mm-hmm. And then the layering, you can do that, I guess. If you don't like a layer, you just dismiss it. You don't.
I dispose of it.
Yeah, I know. My husband Roy Nicholson does a similar thing. Yeah, I know you know Roy, and he was an early user of Photoshop and taught color on the computer at Southampton College. But for him, he uses it almost as a sketching tool. So because he is a painter and he's primarily working either in painting or printmaking, but by digitizing and then manipulating the image, he can work on it without physically touching it. And that has been very helpful for him.
Give him my regards, please.
I certainly will. So do you do that sort of thing too? Do you then you bring it into say another medium, like printing it out? Or
I print it out.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. Generally speaking, in editions of 3. For all the images in the show in Southampton, next month I proceed, right?
Opens at the end of April, yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't open on April Fool, thank God. I mean,
no, or on Easter or on Passover. We're missing those crucial junctions.
Or I suspect, unfortunately, I've been pretty prescient, if I may brag for a minute. And Suzanne can back me up for this. I predicted this about 6 months ago. The first rumbles with Trump and his minions. So this is all going to lead to, collapse of the West if it succeeds. I mean, Putin and I don't want to get political, but Putin and Trump are made of the same cloth. They're both megalomaniacal autocrats of the first order. I mean, they're not good people.
We know that.
And they are cut from it. And for example, Trump called Putin 2 to 3 days ago a genius, and he's running the limit on Biden, and Biden is an idiot. This is Trump speaking a few days ago. Anyway, enough of politics. I'm not here for politics.
Well, I know it, but in a sense,
we're going to talk politics.
Well, people say that all art is political because it has a message, and even abstract art such as Pollock and Krasner created has a political background behind it, because they wouldn't be doing the kind of image that they did if they hadn't lived in those times and been influenced by this geopolitical situation. And I just think that it's almost impossible to keep it out of your art.
Well, I think a lot of the great theorist from the Frankfurt School, I'm blocking his name at the moment, Theodore Adorno, once said, and I quote him in I also write, so I can't keep me down. If I go wrong in the studio, I go to my writing desk. I will send you the current book I've just finished. I mean, I didn't finish it. It's already published, and we just have a few copies left. But I'm going to make sure you get one.
Oh, thank you.
And that's true for you, Colin, as well. And he said, we're talking about Adorno, he said, there's no such thing as bad art. Art is either is or isn't. There's no such thing as failed art. It either is or it isn't. And an object that proclaims to be art and is not art by consensus or judgment is essentially a rejected artifact. It has a real thing it's in the world. I mean, think of a person like Peter Max. That's an artifact, but it's not art. Art has a reverberating presence in a strange way, and it never goes stale. It never runs out of fuel. That's how you judge a great work of art, or actually any work of art. Any work of art that gets by Theodore Adorno's criteria is, in the game. It should never run out.
Well, that's why artists
never goes stale.
Artists look back to the past for inspiration, not just because they need new ideas, but because they connect with the art of the past and what the artist was trying to accomplish. It isn't about copying, it's about really connecting.
Yeah. Also, I have my arguments with Walter Benjamin, but who did a lot of things which I think were just stupid. And then I use that word carefully. But the one thing he did point out was what art is up against in reproduction is that it loses its aura. And I think one function of the artist in the current this era, is to return to the issue of aura. Only don't use the word aura, use the word presence. It has presence in the way that the artists of the 17th, 18th century, let's say, use the word aura.
So the idea of something that goes beyond what you see. In other words, there's something behind it that animates it for you, even if it's static, that it animates it for you mentally or spiritually in some way.
Correct. I mean, I would go along with the spiritual part. That's the other thing that's been destroyed, is a sense of spirit. It's all gone down the hill with organized religion, in my opinion. I'm a Jesuit product, so when it comes to religion, it starts a fire under my ass.
But the Jesuits are full of questions, so that's a good thing.
Yes, they teach you to question. It's one of the tenets of Jesuitical thinking. And they have another interesting anecdote. I may as well pass it on. They said, when you join any group of any substantial size, don't say a word for a year. Just listen.
Just listen. Yeah. So what do you think about Techspressionism as a concept? I mean, the idea that technology should be a means of enabling the artist to reach a subjective level in their work, that it's not just technology for its own sake, but that it has that subjective dimension.
Well, I agree with it. I agree with the premise. It's a good word for it, perhaps. I think over time, maybe a shorter word would suffice.
Too many syllables.
and vowels. Yes, I agree with it. I mean, the idea is it's not technology for its own sake. It's technology for the world's sake. And
that's interesting, that you're going beyond individual expression, that it should have some broader relevance or significance.
Well, I think ultimately, in the final analysis, what the function of the artist is at this point in time is to re-enchant the natural world. The natural world has been reduced to rubble. And for example, our Paleolithic ancestors would be strolling along in a small band, and come to a grove of trees and considered it sacred, a place of eminence both, and they wouldn't touch it. They would consider it a sacred grove. Our current sack of human beings would come upon the same grove that the Paleolithic came upon, and they would figure out where to put the condos, where to put the shopping malls, where to put the printing press to make money, and we would make money from cutting we would clear cut most of it.
Mm.
That's the contrast.
Mm. Yeah, that we've lost touch with
Correct. So a re-enchantment of the world is a fundamental and primary interest that I would say is imperative. Imperative. It's no longer art for art's sake. Sorry, it's no longer art for art. It's art for the world's sake.
Mm. And you really feel that the artist can make a difference?
Absolutely. A very small one at the moment. I had an exchange with a good friend of mine. I'll make this quick. And we were talking about what would happen if all the works of art in the world, or visual arts, let's say, all the visual works of art in the world would suddenly disappear. And he said, well, what do you think, Gillette? And I said, and he ended the sentence, but I said, 3% of the world wouldn't know the difference. Whether it is or isn't would make no difference whatsoever. 2% of the world would pretend to a horror they did not actually experience. And maybe 0.5% would die from the results.
And the other 94.5%, what would they do?
I'm not a mathematician. Oh, I'm sort of I envy mathematics. I'm sort of actually I put it, not quite an amateur, because amateurs spend too much time on their amateurs. Something like I have a tertiary interest in mathematics.
Well, you have obviously 100% interest in humanity, and your devotion to trying and through whatever means are accessible to you to reach and to change and to inspire people through your art, I think is commendable. And I just wonder, if you feel like you are making a difference.
It's not for me to judge. No, that would be either I would, and this would be genuine. I would be attacked as a braggart.
Oh, I understand.
I'm a braggart enough, so I'm not going to.
So the pieces that you're going to be, the pieces you're going to be showing at Southampton, that's from your latest series?
No, 2 years ago.
What are you working on now?
Oddly enough, what I'm working on is I have a series of 3 video triptychs, all made with the devices I told, mostly Final Cut Pro. They're triptychs, 1, 2, 3 screens. I finished the first 2, and I'm working on the 3rd. So it's going to be a triptych of triptychs. And one of them is already museumized. It's the Everson bought it. And the next one is up for grabs. ZKM in Germany will buy the other one. They're also an edition of 3. And that's my most recent work. I'm working on the 3rd triptych.
And so what's the imagery?
The imagery is the natural world and how it's being destroyed through one of the most fundamental of all metaphors. The metaphor, this goes back to Shakespeare, Hamlet, the fourth act, where he's addressing the actors to be for the play within a play. He says halfway through his soliloquy, and we should hold up a mirror to the nature of the world.
Mhm.
Beautiful metaphor. We
Mhm.
should hold up a mirror to the nature of the world. And so one of my devices will be in all three.
Mhm.
But as the triptychs become, from 1 to 2 to 3, they become more intense in this metaphor.
Mhm.
I cast stones at mirrors in nature.
Hmm.
So it's a casting of stones for the mirror of nature, the mirror representing nature, a la Shakespeare,
Mhm.
and the stone being its destruction.
Mm. But then where is its resurrection?
What's the direction?
No, where is its resurrection?
Oh,
If you,
resurrection.
yeah, if you destroy it,
By the
how
way,
can it be recreated?
through awareness, substantially.
Mm.
I can't see. I shouldn't say this, but I'm pessimistic.
Mm.
For the short and medium rain rather, I'm pessimistic. For the third, again, the triptych, third reign, I am less pessimistic. I wouldn't say I'm suddenly an optimist. It's not Candide speaking. Um, it's too ingrained. I mean, people. I mean, this war is a great distraction. The war is horrible, horrific, evil. The war is. It will not have the lasting effect of ecological collapse
Mm.
by far.
Mm.
And people, ecologists for years now, when I met Bateson, all he was discussing was ecological collapse in other terms.
Mm.
And he said, basically, we want artists to pick up this idea. Are you willing to do that? And I said, absolutely. Thumbs up.
Mm.
And I had it in my head anyway, but I mean, it was a great confirmation.
Mm.
And Bateson is a very important thinker. Unfortunately, he's largely inaccessible to people who are not already familiar with those ideas. So
Mm.
that's a limitation. But anyway, his last book before his death is quite accessible.
Mm.
Mind and Nature is its title.
Mm.
Marvelous work.
Mm.
But going back to your question, what can you do in the meantime, even though you're a pessimist? I'll tell you how I'm a pessimist, if you don't mind. George Bernard Shaw, I ripped him off.
Mm.
George Bernard Shaw once said, the difference between a pessimist and an optimist is that the optimist fears the pessimist is right.
Mm.
Did I say that right?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think
You get
you're,
the idea?
yeah.
I messed up Shaw. I should have had it eloquently, but because I quote the book, I quote Shaw endless. We share a birthday. I guess that helps.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, what else? Let's see. Next question.
Well, I think you've actually given us a great deal to think about, and in the exhibition, you'll give us a great deal to look at as well. And I
Yeah.
think, see, this is the magic of the medium, is that it gives you the outlet that you would not have had in your painting or in your writing or in any other form, that you can use this technology to create something deeply expressive, very personal, but also universal in its message and its meaning.
Oh, thank you. I
So
expected.
thank you, Frank. It's been a real pleasure, and look forward to seeing you at the opening in April. And thank you so much for participating in this talk.
Thank you as well. You were half of it, so. I will also send you the copy of my book, the most recent one.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you have my address, but I can email you, make sure you have it.
Okay, I appreciate it. Take
Great.
care.
You
Enjoy the
too.
rest of the day.